In today's podcast, we are visiting a site full of myth, monastic history, and movie magic. Yep, we're heading to Skellig Michael. Thank you so much for joining me again on another episode of the Traveling in Ireland podcast. I am so often asked about the Skellig Islands, and while I know quite a bit, I'm definitely not an expert. So today I am joined by my friend Neil Jackman, who was actually one of my earliest guests on the podcast way back in episode 25. I just want to remind you, though, before we jump into this, that if you happen to visit a place or a business that you heard about on the podcast, be sure to let them know. This helps me to get more great guests on the show to share more terrific Ireland attractions and tips. So go ahead and be a name dropper. Just say, I heard about you on the Traveling in Ireland podcast. So as I mentioned, my guest today is Neil Jackman. Neil is an archaeologist, the director of Abarta Heritage and his new venture, Tua, and the author of guidebooks on the heritage sites of Ireland titled Ireland's Ancient East and Ireland's Wild Atlantic Way, a guide to its historic treasures. Both of these books have lived on my bookshelf since they were released and provide incredible knowledge and inspiration for my own trips. So Neil, lots of introduction. Thank you so much for joining me again on the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Jody. It's great to be back with you again. And congratulations on moving on so much from episode 25. It feels like a long time ago now.
I know we're looking at 275 episodes in between. So it's a great stretch. And I've known you for so long, and you've provided me since we met with so much amazing information. I think we actually met on Twitter back in the day when people used Twitter for more than just like news bites.
Yeah, and complaining to each other and giving out about politics. Yeah, it's a different world.
Exactly. I am so grateful that you agreed to join me today for a chat about the Skellig Islands, because these are a super popular destination, and they have been for quite a while, but obviously they became even more so after the Star Wars phenomenon. And while I have quite a bit of knowledge about the islands, about travel, especially about having trips canceled to the islands, because that has been my experience every time, you actually have visited the islands multiple times. And as an archaeologist, I know that your information is just so in depth. So let's start, and we'll kind of just tick all the boxes as we go. So why don't we just start with the location, first of all?
Yeah, sure. Oh, it's such a special part of the country, and it's such a beautiful place. So it's around 12 kilometres or 8 miles off the coast of County Kerry, off Bullis Head. And it's really beautiful. It is quite a special thing. It really looms large when you're on the Iveragh Peninsula or the Ring of Kerry. You get these occasional little glimpses of it. But when you get closer and closer to it, it's like something out of a fantasy film. And I think George Bernard Shaw described it as the most fantastic, impossible rock in the world. And I think that's pretty accurate. It is like a pyramid of this jagged rock, and it's accompanied by the Little Skellig, of course, and it's made of old Devonian sandstone that runs all the way to the McGillicuddy Reeks, Ireland's tallest mountains, are all made out of this same thing. This is just like a little offshore mountain in its own right. So it's really special. It's off. If you're down in that kind of part of County Kerry, I think it'd be a place that caught your eye for sure.
Well, even just viewing it from the Skellig Ring, it juts out of the water. It looks like you said, a pyramid jutting out of the water, very distinct. And if you have a nice clear day, you can get a really good view of it from the Skellig Ring. But I'm sure that is absolutely nothing compared to being on the island. What is it about the history? Because I know that for a lot of people, they go for that amazing, almost unbelievable history of the Skelligs.
Yeah, it's got quite a long story, and it's quite, as you say, it's a fascinating one as well. I guess people kind of know it for a couple of the key aspects of the story, but it even goes way back into mythology. It appears in some of those earliest tales, But I guess the place that a lot of people would associate with Skellig Michael is the early monastery there. And that was thought to have been founded by St. Finan in around about the 7th century. So you're talking 1300 years, give or take, or more. By the 11th century, that monastery had been rededicated to St. Michael, the Archangel, and that's where we get its name from today, Skellig Michael, meaning Michael's Rock. And those early monks that first went out there, you got to imagine this is at a time where for us, we get on a diesel-powered boat and a cabin, and it's still quite a rough ride, right?
Even on a nice day, that ride is pretty rocky.
It can be, right? So imagine that on a skin-covered curragh. You're heading out there, and they believed in this early form of Christianity. It kind of followed on from the Desert Fathers in places like Egypt and things like that, where these monks would go out into the desert because then they're unencumbered by worldly politics. They're unencumbered by temptation, luxury or anything like this. They could dedicate their entire focus to God. Now, Ireland, as you may have noticed in all your travels, doesn't do deserts that well, right? It's a little bit wet and rainy here for that. But we can have our own sort of version of that with these island monasteries. And that's part of the reason we've got so many of them. And Skellig Michael, probably the most famous of all. And what they did when they got out there in the 7th century, what you can kind of experience today to some extent, although there has been conservation works and things over time, is they built a small monastery just below the northern peak. And that's actually in a really sheltered little saddle right up at the top. So you're out of the prevailing winds there. And up there, you've got a stone enclosure, all made out of dry stone. They didn't use cement or the equivalent of mortar or anything like that. They built these clacons, which are these dry stone beehive-shaped, iconic little houses and to serve as the churches, their oratories, and the places where they lived. There are lochtai, which are these outdoor altars. There's a small plain high cross there, and there's a small burial area. But there's all of the other functional aspects too, right? So there's water cisterns because there's no source of water on the island. So they had to collect rainwater and store it in kind of stone systems. There's flights of steps, for example, which we might talk about a little later. And there's even, if Skellig Michael, the monastery there, isn't extreme enough, there's a hardcore version of it in this tiny little hermitage that's just below the southern peak, which has a tiny little clachan up there. Now, you can't get there as a visitor because it's too dangerous today. So most people haven't accessed that. I haven't myself, unfortunately. But so they put quite a lot of work in over quite a considerable period of time. And what we visit today gives you just a little bit of a sort of a feel for what their life must have been like. But to be honest, it is hard not to be dazzled by the landscape and the scenery when you're out there. I mean, I don't know. To me, it's not a place free of distraction because the landscape is a distraction. It's the most beautiful place in the world to me. And that's before we even get into all the wildlife that you can see there. So it is a special kind of unusual place. We know quite a bit from bits and pieces anyway from historical references to it. For all of its isolation, it didn't stop the Vikings. Few things can. They raided Skellig Michael a number of times, probably most notably on a very famous occasion because we have a clear reference to that. And that's in the year 824. And that's it's in the Annals of Ulster and the Annals of Innisfallen. The Vikings kidnapped the abbot of Skellig Michael, a man called Etgal, and he died of hunger and thirst during his captivity. So they were trying to ransom him back and nobody paid, essentially, and the poor guy died for it. So the monastery continued probably up until about the 12th, maybe early 13th century. And then the monks essentially abandoned the monastery at that point. And there was another foundation set up on the mainland, which is connected. So they probably moved there. But it continued, and even today continues to be an important place for pilgrimage. So it was never like everyone walked away and left it. It had an afterlife, if you like, as well. And of course, there's later features there as well. There's 2 lighthouses. And they had lighthouse keepers that lived there full time from the 1820s up till it was automated in 1981. It's kind of got that slightly later story there as well. So it remains a place that is very important, both locally around that sort of Skellig Ring, as you'd call it, around places like Port McGee and Ledger Island. But it also remains a place that's it's a World Heritage Site. It is one of the most important heritage sites in the world. And I think if you get the chance to experience it, I think you'd see why it is something different.
When we say the Skellig Islands, everybody knows Skellig Michael, but there is Little Skellig. Now, you can't visit Little Skellig because it is a bird sanctuary, but did the monks build on Little Skellig, or did they not do anything with that island? That's always kind of fascinated me on the differentials, I guess, of those.
Yeah, it's a great question, Jody, actually. And there's been some interesting recent work looking at this. Little Skellig, as you say, it gets its name because it is dramatically smaller than Skellig Michael, and it's much more inhospitable. There isn't any nice grassy slopes or anything like that. And it's extremely jaggedy, to put it mildly, right? It's also home to a colony of around about, I think it's about 30 to 40,000 gannets. And they've covered every inch of it with the droppings. And unfortunately as well, there's lots of, like, they build the sort of rough nests out of things like fishing nets and detritus and stuff like that. So it's a really, really hard island to actually look at archaeologically. Now, an archaeologist, Mick Gibbons, has had a look at the island. He's done work previously on Skellig Michael, and he believes that there was a small oratory there. And I'd love to know more about that. I think that would be absolutely fascinating. I haven't read the full paper on it as yet, but I think that's been, something that Mick's been looking at, and I'd love to find out more. It's just one of those, because the gannets are there for quite a long spell of the year, and the time they're not there is the worst of winter. Plus, as I say, it's difficult to actually see what's going on underneath the mess the gannets leave behind. It is a hard one to get a really clear glimpse of what was there in comparison to Skellig Michael itself. But it would be a surprise if it was completely ignored. Let's put it like that. And of course, the monks and indeed the population around that part of Kerry would have been using Little Skellig as well as Skellig Michael for things like eggs and birds and resources for that way as well. So it would have certainly been in use to some degree.
So we've kind of touched a little bit on the boat, and we'll get a little more into that. But let's talk about when the visiting season is, how you visit, and booking recommendations, because this isn't something that you can visit Ireland at any time of the year and access. The weather really can wreak havoc, even in those shoulder seasons. That's why I've never made it out to the island, because I prefer to travel in the shoulder season. So either the boats are not running, they've just stopped running or haven't started yet, or the weather has completely ruined any chances of getting out there. So, when do you visit? How do you visit? And what do you recommend if people are looking to make bookings?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, Jody. It's a hard site to get to for a lot of people, and partly because it's been made a lot trickier post-Star Wars, because even though that wasn't, let's say, as those Star Wars films didn't loom quite as large in people's imagination as the original trilogy, it still brings a lot of interest and a lot of popularity. So I remember when I first went to Skellig Michael back in 2013, it cost €45 for a ticket. And these days it's about 130 or 140 euros for a ticket. And that's because of that demand. Now, you can only go, it is a short season. So it's from sort of, I think it's like late April till, I don't know, is it all the way to the end of September? Or is it more like in the next week or two of September?
Every time I've seen it, it fluctuates a little bit depending on the first day, the last day. But yeah, it's late April, early May to late September, early October-ish, right? It changes every year.
Yeah, for sure. There is a bit of fluctuation there. And that's the thing to bear in mind with Skellig Michael. It isn't, as you say, it's not like going to Blarney Castle or something like that, right? You're looking at the weather conditions are all important. And so I've tried to go, I think, maybe 9 times now, and I've landed 6. And that's a really good ratio, because roughly about a third of all trips are cancelled because of the weather conditions. And it can even, there's been the odd sickening day where it's been beautiful in Portmagee in the morning, like as still and as calm as a mill pond. But because of where the pier is that the boat has to tie up on, the sea conditions there have to be very gentle, because any sort of a swell, they can't tie up to safely let the passengers off. Everything is, of course, safety is all important. So even when it looks nice, you can still fall unlucky that way. So you always need a good backup plan, and we can talk about backup plans a little later. So that's the sort of experience. Now, there are a couple of options for how to get there. The most popular place would be probably Portmagee. That's usually where I go from. I think there are boat operators that go from Valentia Island as well. And I don't know if they're still operating, but from Derrynane as well, a little further along. There's a couple of different options to get. The pricing is always in and around about the same. You're talking somewhere between 120 to 140 euros in and around. But because visitor numbers are restricted not only because of the weather conditions, but because of the importance of the site, both archaeologically, but as a habitat. They are extremely curtailed with how many people they can have. So that's why prices are high. That's why tickets sell out. And the tickets could go on sale often sort of late March, thereabouts, and the landing tours can be booked out within a few days, for the whole year. So you have to kind of either do one of two things. You either have to get on early and be lucky, or a huge amount of those, not a huge amount, a certain amount of those early bookings will cancel themselves because those people are thinking, oh, I'll hold on to a ticket just in case, and then I'll cancel. So you can get lucky on the day or, the week before, but usually it's solid out and it can be hard work to get a ticket.
Right. So I know, and it's been a long time since the boat trips have done this, where if you couldn't get on one day, they could get you on the next day. And this was before Skellig Michael became very, very popular. And now they don't do that. So if your tour cancels, it cancels. If they have a cancellation, they'll pop you on to the next day if you're in the area. But if you want to make sure that you're getting out to Skellig Michael, the recommendation that I've heard from the boat operators is book a ticket for every day of your trip. And then, if you make it the first day, then you don't need to go the second day or third day if you've booked that, but you are just out that money. Is that your understanding as well?
I mean, it could be a tactic. I would certainly have a look at the fine print of the cancellation fees. If you're booking for 5 days in a row and you only intend on using one, if you leave it too late to cancel those other 4, you could be charged for them all the same.
Well, I mean, because you'd never know, right? You don't know if, because obviously if your trip's canceled, then you're going to get that refunded. You can't be guaranteed to get on the next day because that day's probably already booked out. And unless somebody cancels, you're out of luck, right?
I see, but say if you get really lucky and you get a week of good weather and then you've got 5 trips to Skellig Michael. I mean, now I personally would love that and I would definitely do that, but not maybe everyone would. But no, that could be a tactic. It is tricky. I think I've tried to do things where I've looked at weather reports for the previous 3 years to see were they successful or not. And, looking at sea conditions and thereabouts. And I think it's so changeable here in Ireland. And the Atlantic, and this is the real Atlantic now. This isn't a sheltered cove. You are out in the wild here. That changes day by day and it changes hour by hour. And it can suddenly turn from being, I've had it before where it's looked dead cert to be cancelled. And then you get a text saying we're actually going at the last minute. And that's it. You run down there, you get on the boat and you're gone. It's amazing. But I've had it where it's the other way around as well. And it's very deflated, So if your whole holiday is going to be built to the idea of getting to Skellig Michael, your best bet is, as you say, maybe to stay locally, give yourself at least a few days and give yourself the best possible chance of getting on. And because it is marvelous, it is special and it is worth putting yourself out for it.
So what can people expect on a landing trip? So like from the time that boat gets to the pier on the island, how much time do they have? What do they expect? Any tips for maybe people who are like, okay, heights or, what kind of safety measures are out there and maybe some limitations that people might want to keep in mind?
Yeah, it's a good question, Jody. And I would say the more bit of research that people do on this in terms of looking online at what to expect, the better a feel they're going to get, because I think it's hard until you're faced with it, you don't know. What I would say is if you're really not good with heights, Skellig Michael might not be for you. If you've got severe vertigo. If you're a little bit nervous, it's not too bad. Like you can get over it. It's not like you're walking along a tightrope or something like that. It's not quite that scary, but there are a couple of moments going up and down those steps where there's nothing much between you at the Atlantic, a long way below you.
Walking sticks, Neil, walking sticks.
I think they're worse to bring, to be honest. And actually the guides on the island would tell you that. And the reason is if you're carrying walking sticks and you start to slip and you start to fall, you need to put your hands out fast. Right? So if you're walking around taking pictures of everything and you've got sticks and all of this, your hands are constantly busy, right? You need your hands. So it's important to say there have been fatalities in the last 20 years on Skellig Michael.
Don't they they take like a couple people a year off by helicopter, don't they? Isn't that kind of the average?
Yeah, it has happened. Now, in one of those cases, I can't speak to the exact details of both of the fatalities I'm thinking of. In one case, it was a fall. And in another case, I think somebody became very unwell and then fell. They might have had heart troubles and then fell, right? But it's not somewhere to take lightly. But let's start with the beginning. Let's start with the boat, right? You've got roughly about, if you're going to land, you've got roughly about 50 minutes. 55 minutes on the boat, anywhere between 45, 55, right? It depends on the wind and the weather. It can be rough. It can be real rough. Even if you're going to land, water will be coming up over the top of the boat. You'll be getting drowned. And it's really funny when you see people getting on the boat, you can tell who's been to Skellig Michael before or who has a bit of experience that way. Because they'll always sit kind of squished in next to the cabin because that's the driest bit. And the ones who sit right at the back going, I'm going to get great pictures. They're like poor, miserable, drowned rats by the time they get to the islands, It can be real rough. So if you get really badly seasick, make sure you're taking your medication leading up, even the day before and things. Stuff like crystallized ginger, all of that sort of stuff. When the boat crew start handing that out at the start, the ginger at the start, you're in for a rough one. Right. But it's like, I like it. I'm lucky I don't get seasick. I've always been very lucky that way. So I don't mind it, but I have seen people really not enjoy it. Now, the good news is that once you're on dry land, within 5 or 10 minutes, you're in one of the most beautiful places in the world. Within 5 or 10 minutes, you've kind of forgot. And then you have a nice there's a walk all the way up to the base of the steps. And that's where you'll meet the OPW guide. Now, the OPW guide at the bottom, I often think their chief job is to scare people away from going up to the top. Because what they want to do, they're not deliberately trying to do it, but I guess the worst possible scenario is it is quite narrow in places. So if somebody gets halfway up and then freezes, people can't go down and they can't go up. So they're trying to say, look, if you are scared, don't do this anyway. Have a walk around here. Because there is no separate way back down. So you're meeting the people who were there before you're coming down as you're going up. So there can be little pinch points and so on where it can be very busy. Also, in terms of that, then you got 618 steps to the top. But there's little places you can take a break. There's a place called Christ's Saddle, which is like a little plateau halfway along. And you can sit down there, maybe have a snack. And the other thing that draws me back every single year I try to go are the Puffins. And that place is full of the Puffins, right? So it's home to about 8,000 puffins, thereabouts, and they have absolutely no fear of people. So they will be sitting in a row on the step that you're trying to get past, and you're like, sorry, trying to nudge past them, like without disturbing them, and they're just looking at you, So yeah, you can take little breaks on the way up here and there. So it's not like you have to go up all 618 steep steps all at once. But saying that, you need a reasonable level of fitness. You don't have to be super fit. You don't have to be able to run a marathon or even a 5K or anything like that. But if you're the kind of person who gets very out of breath walking upstairs, up more than one flight of steps, Skellig will be a challenge. It's not the kind of place to be out of breath and dizzy. It's the kind of place really that you want a little bit of sort of energy for in that sort of a sense. But I've been there with people who have been in their 80s. I've been there with people with a variety of different sorts of abilities and so on. So I don't want to put anyone off, but it's just to be aware of what your own limitations are and what your own positive aspects are.
What about children?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think according to the OPW, I think you're to be 12 to go. Now, I've definitely seen children a little younger, but not much younger than that. I wouldn't bring anyone.
I think on the official OPW video, there's actually a video of a guy with a small child, and the child is actually physically tied to him by a rope. Have you seen that one?
Yeah, I love that video, and everyone should watch it because it's the funniest video I've ever seen in my life. So this was made probably in the 90s when health and safety wasn't quite as industrialized as it is now, right? And you're right, he's got a child, a girl of maybe 11-ish, and he's leading her up the steps, and she has like a piece of baling twine. It's not even good rope. Baling twine tied around her waist, and he's holding on lightly with one hand. Like, if she fell, what's he really going to do with that baling twine? Like, it's not going to stop it. It's hilarious anyway. So yeah, I think about 11 or 12 is about right. The kid has to have some degree of sense as well, because there's people scared behind them, in front of them. And if they're messing on the steps, if they're leaping around and whatnot, they might cause an accident, that sort of way as well, because it is so narrow. I've got two boys myself. One is 8 and the other one's 3. The idea of the 3-year-old on Skellig Michael would be the thing of nightmares because, like, that boy is just wild. The 8-year-old, I think, because he's a little chip off the old block, he's a bit of an apprentice. I kind of think he wouldn't be far off it now, but I'd still probably wait another year or two.
So how long is the landing trip? I know that there are now, there's now like 1 or 2 portable toilets on the island. There didn't used to be, right?
Yeah, there's a proper toilet with 2 things. Yeah, and there wasn't beforehand, so you had to be good at holding it because you'd be getting the boat about maybe 8:30, and then you're landing about an hour later. You might land because sometimes you have to wait in a queue for boats to land in this jet, and then you probably got till maybe 1-ish or 2-ish on the island. So you got a good few hours. The very first time I went, it was right at the end of the season. It was in September. On the boat, it was myself and my wife, and there was about, I think, 8 German tourists. And that was it. There was no other boats. And we landed. The island was empty, essentially. And the German, my wife was a little bit nervous of going up the steps and so on. So we kind of took our time. We were down at the bottom. They shot off ahead of us. And then as we were going up the steps, they walked past us. And we knew that they had a good few hours to wait for the boat. So I was like, where are they going? There's nowhere else on the island. So anyway, they went up, took photographs, went straight back down and sat and waited for the boat for hours. So myself and my wife had the whole monastery to ourselves for like 2 or 3 hours. It was the most amazing experience. So yes, you get a good few hours there on the island. The toilets, I would say, I have a tip to that. If you can hold on, when you get off the boat, don't use the bathroom because you'll be queuing. Everyone uses the bathroom as soon as they get off the boat. So if you don't want to be stuck in a big rush getting up the steps with loads of other people all at once, you like a quieter route, try and go before you get on the boat. I think is my top tip that way. So you'll be a good few hours. There's no anything you bring on the island you have to take off the island. There's no facilities like rubbish bins, this, that, and the other, right? So you can bring snacks, of course. You can bring your own water, sandwiches and such. Just make sure that you're leaving no trace whatsoever because of all the wildlife there on the island and just because that's the right thing to do. And then, you're back on the boat then for your 50 minutes or so, heading straight back. It's weird. It's such a surreal experience. It's very hard to get across. Again, George Bernard Shaw, I like him because he kind of describes it in the way you're like, yes, that's exactly how I think of it. He said something along the lines of, it's not a place that belongs in any world of yours or mine. It's dream world. It doesn't belong to our practical world today. And it is like that. It's a very dreamlike feeling when you're there, particularly if you're there when the puffins are home and all the gannets are around and things like that. It's just something astonishing.
So the last part of kind of this Skellig trip that I want to touch on are the eco tours, because I know that a couple of my Skellig tours that got canceled, they said, well, we can go out and do the eco tour, and go around the islands. We just can't dock. So let's just touch on those just a tiny bit and what that means and what it entails.
Yeah, so you'll often get that as an option, right? Usually if the weather is workable, but the swell for landing is too bad, you could go on an eco tour instead. Or you could book an eco tour just as an option if you don't fancy the steps, right? And it's a good long boat ride now around the 2 islands. And you get to see, now the monastery is perched quite high up, so you don't get to see a tremendous amount of the detail, but you can see the shapes of the clacans and the boundary wall of the thing, and you can see the different flights of steps going up to it, the lighthouses. But it's really special for the wildlife. So if you're lucky, you'll be joined by pods of dolphins. Quite often you'd see dolphins out there. You'll definitely see all the gannets. And that is like, it's almost like a prehistory or something, having all of these gannets, because they're massive for a start. They're way bigger than any gull that you would think of. And they plummet into the water around about 70 miles per hour or 80 miles per hour, like missiles diving all around the boat. It's just astonishing, making this incessant noise constantly. So it's really kind of overwhelming for the senses. And of course, the puffins should be out fishing as well. So you should see some puffins.
In the spring to early summer, not in the fall, right?
No. So the puffins arrive kind of beginning of April, but they're gone by like the second week of July. So they're back out towards Canada and off the Atlantic shelf and so on, and they'll be back then the next spring. So you have to get in before that. So you could still land on the island like the first time I went, and there'd be no puffins. You might even get glimpses of whales. I've seen a couple of minke whale. Some lucky people in recent years have seen humpback whales. Last time, not this year, the previous trip, I saw Rizzo's dolphins, which is these really cool white dolphins with like very blunt heads. So you see some fantastic wildlife in the cost seals as well. And that's pretty magical too. So for me, I think the eco tour is definitely a good option. It's definitely worth looking at. I think it's around about 50 or 60 euros now. This year, I was a bit unfortunate myself. I'd booked my tickets to go, and there was an issue over the granting of permits for boat operators this year. They weren't allowed to land, and there was like a legal dispute that went on a very, very long time. So they weren't allowed to bring people to the island. So I didn't want to cancel on them, because basically for those boat operators, if the trip is cancelled, they get no money. There's no insurance package that fills the boat, right? So I kind of feel like going down and supporting them, and of course the local accommodation providers and stuff like that as well. So like I wanted to go and do that anyway, so I took the eco tour again this year. I still think it's well worth the trip to go and do that, and especially if you know a few good places to go looking at on the mainland to kind of soothe the, soothe the angst about not getting on Skellig Michael itself.
And younger kids can do that eco tour. So if you're traveling with a family and maybe, you're like, okay, kids just aren't quite old enough for this full Skellig Michael experience, you could still take the eco tour, get some beautiful views, and then you have also those animals and birds and stuff. So I think it's a really nice option, especially for families.
It is for sure. Again, the only slight thing to consider with the eco tour is you're continuously on the boat. You don't get off onto the island, right? So if you suffer with seasickness and you think I can just about do 50 minutes, well, you've got like 2.5 hours or something constantly on a boat, right? So that's the only slight hesitation I would put on that. But if you think you'd be by and large fairly grand with it, and your family would be, it's a lovely option. And the kind of the wildlife, the scenery, the green of the island roaring out from the dark blue Atlantic, it's special.
That's so terrific, Neil. And you had so much amazing information to share, and I want to thank you so much for that. So let's shift gears a little bit, and let's talk about Abarta Heritage and TUA. So what are these? They're separate but together. What is it that you do, and how do you help people? Because I know you have free guides, you have paid memberships, you have itineraries. So talk a little bit about those businesses.
I'm obsessed with telling people about amazing historical sites to go and visit in Ireland, right? So I just try to find every different way that I can to do that. But as you said at the beginning, I'm an archaeologist myself. I do a variety of different things in archaeology. We're involved with a number of different research projects and so on. But one area that we tend to focus on at Abarta Heritage is what you would call public archaeology. So how do we engage the general public with the story of Ireland's past? How do we form a bridge between all of this new research that's being done, really exciting excavations and things like that, with sort of telling the story aspect of that to people in a way that doesn't dumb anything down, but at the same time isn't like reading a dense academic 12,000 word paper, which is going into all the science of it, right? So that's where we kind of put ourselves. So we do a big variety of different types of work with that, and typically we work with bodies like the Heritage Council, with communities all around Ireland, and we help sort of engage with them to go through the process. Say if they've got a medieval church that's fallen into, they don't want to be the generation that it completely collapses on. We sort of help mentor them through the process of conservation, how they find out more about the story of the place and do more research, and how do you get people to go along and visit it in the future and so on. So we do that sort of thing. As part of that, we have a lot of free audio guides and audio books. We have a channel called Discover the Stories of Ireland, which has all of those, so you can find out about the Aran Islands, let's say, and you could just listen to it like a podcast, but it's a professional actor narrating with all the information about the place. And one thing I really kind of wanted to kind of do more of, I've been lucky enough to get to write a couple of guidebooks, to Wild Atlantic Way and Islands Edge East and so on. And I say, I love that process of kind of going to a place, kind of getting a feeling for it, working out, is this a good place for people to visit? Is it good for the site for people to visit? Because sometimes visitors can put pressures on and this, that, and the other. Sometimes the site isn't safe. And so, as you could probably tell, I could talk all day about this stuff, but I love sharing the stories with people too, right? So we started something called Tour, and that's like a membership service that what we do is a variety of different things. So we've got more than 40 itineraries that people can follow for all around Ireland. And again, it's very much focused on the history, the heritage, the folklore, the archaeology. So, for example, if they wanted to go to Skellig Michael, the boat got cancelled, I've got an itinerary there with 22 of my favourite places that they can pick and choose from along that area that they can go and see with information about the story of the place, but also like Google Map links and all that kind of handy stuff to actually do it. So we've got all of those itineraries, loads and loads of articles. A large number of the articles are free that people can kind of have a dig into, including for Skellig Michael there as well. But we also have online courses for people who want to do that little bit more in depth. So they can get an introduction to Irish archaeology or genealogy. We have regular webinars then with leading experts. So we have one this month with Christian Collett on Ireland's Round Towers. Chris has just done a fantastic book on them, And we have expert-led tours as well. So Professor Marisha Sullivan, who wrote the definitive book on the Mound of the Hostages, the Hill of Tara, is going to be giving our members a tour of Tara, and it's giving you the opportunity really to ask questions and interact with the people who know those places best, and that's the whole thing we try and do, whether it's with the Barter or with Tour, is to form that bridge between people who are really, really interested in this stuff and the experts that have all of the knowledge about this stuff, and we kind of help to facilitate that because it benefits both.
And I can say that you also have a Monument Monday newsletter that is absolutely fabulous because you choose a different archaeological site every week that you profile. And it's just so interesting to read more of that full story. It's absolutely free. I'm going to make sure that there is a link in the show notes that you can grab that. And Neil also mentioned 22 sites in and around the Skellig region. And we do have a free Ring of Kerry itinerary that you can grab as well. So that will be in the show notes too. So loads of great information for you to get from Tua and Neil. I mean, if it doesn't inspire you to want to visit, it's just really fascinating information.
Yeah, that's it. Because the other thing I wanted to do with Tour as well is because I know there's a lot of people in like maybe America, or Canada, or Australia, and they have a strong connection to Ireland. Maybe they have family roots there. Or sometimes people just have this real love of Ireland, even if they don't have that direct family connection. And I wanted to create something that would be useful for people if they're not even planning to trip for one reason or another. They can't get to Ireland. Maybe it's too expensive or maybe family commitments or whatever else. So they can actually still immerse themselves in the stories and they can still really get under the skin. It's all about, I think, for me, right, you must have found this too, Jody, right? If you go to see a historical site, a castle or something like that, and there's not much information around there, or the information you see is a little bit sort of patchy, it's still a nice experience. You get to see it. But when you understand the meaning of the place, who lived there, why it's in that particular place, what the lived experience was, what the life was like for the person, I think it means so much more and you can kind of get a much richer, fuller experience for your time there. So that's what we're trying to get across.
It gives you a connection to place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's it. Because otherwise you're just kind of looking at the surface of it in a way, which is great and it's good, but I think the story just gives you that little bit more.
Definitely. So, Neil, we have talked for a terrific amount of time, and I can't thank you enough for sharing all this with me, but I'm not going to let you go just yet because you did mention so many things around the Ring of Kerry. So I always tell people that they should probably spend a minimum of 3 days in that area to really get out and absorb it. So if you were to say there are 3 things on the Ring of Kerry that should definitely be visited, not mentioning the Skellig Islands, what would those 3 places be? If you're visiting the Skellig Ring and not using a driver, you are going to need to rent a car. When it's time to compare car rental prices, check out Irish Car Rentals, my top pick for great vehicles and outstanding customer service. Plus, I have an exclusive 10% discount when you book using link IrelandFamilyVacations.com/ICR. So start your journey the smart way. Save more and explore more with Irish Car Rentals.
Oh, God. Do you know, the thing I always find most difficult about creating the itineraries and writing the guidebooks are all the sites you have to leave out, right? And now 3 is the thing that's coming up. I'll give you 2 sets of 3.
But I know that on the ring itself, there's multiple stone ring forts. Should you visit them all? Is there one that's best? I know it's a bad, hard question.
No, it's fine. I mean, for me, I think if you get in the boat from Port McGee, you're looking across at Valentia Island, right? And Valentia Island is beautiful anyway. You know, it's a gorgeous place to go and have a walk and have a little drive around. But there's something really special on Valentia Island, which it staggers me every time I go there, which is the tetrapod trackway. And one of our recent webinars was with one of Ireland's leading experts in paleontology, Professor Maria McNamara of UCC. And she raves about this place as well, because you can see the footprints there of one of the first vertebrate animals ever to walk on the surface of planet Earth. 380 million years old. And you can see his little footprints or her little footprints, you know, and where the tail was and everything. And I can't believe that you could just, there's no visitor center, there's nothing, you know, there's a sign, but you can go and sit and just imagine life in Ireland 380 million years ago when Ireland was part of this bigger landmasses. I think that's astonishing, and I think it really should be a World Heritage Site in its own. I think that's really, really special. You mentioned the stone forts. Loher Fort is beautiful, really interesting, and there's Cahagall and the Canawillia, which are near Carsavine if you're out that way. I'm going to cheat a little and just add a couple more in, though, if that's okay, because these are connected to Skellig Michael. Because when we think of Skellig Michael, and I was talking about its isolation before, it was actually part of this broader network, right? It had places on the mainland associated with. And if you're around the kind of Ballinskelligs sort of area, there's Ballinskelligs Priory, which is an Augustinian priory, which I think is late 12th, early 13th century. And that's where monks from Skellig Michael apparently went after, right? So there's a really nice connection between the two. And just close to there, and this is one that most people wouldn't know about, is Tower Mihal, that's St. Michael's Holy Well. And it's this gorgeous little dry stone oratory, little holy well there. And it's just beautiful as well. So that's worth a look. But as you say, I think 3 days for that little section, because you got Derry Nan and all of that side of it as well, with beautiful beaches and places. So I know I've just mentioned about 8 already. And the Skellig's chocolate as well, but I don't think that counts because it's not like a historical site. So I'm going to throw that in.
I think Skellig's chocolates counts because that is worth the trip along the Skellig Ring all on its own.
And that's a nice reward because you're going to be doing so much walking and taking in the scenery and thinking about the history. You need a bit of chocolate. That whole area is beautiful.
Exactly. Not that you have to justify your chocolate.
No, not at all. Not at all. But that whole region, honestly, for me, it's one of the most beautiful parts of Ireland. There's a reason it's popular with tourists, and it has been for a long time. It is stunningly beautiful. It really is. There's great food there as well. There's great places to kind of stay. And I do think it's definitely worth a few days.
100%. Well, Neil, again, thank you so much. This was so informative, so much terrific information. And I know that my listeners are really going to get a lot out of this.
I hope so. It's a special place, and any opportunity, as you can tell with Skellig Michael, I'm happy to chat about. It's something different. You know, it really is. It's a special thing that we have here. And I hope you get to land next year, maybe.
One day, hopefully. So before, I didn't ask this earlier, and I should. How can people follow you for more information or get in touch?
Yeah, it'd be great to keep in touch with people. So we're on most of the social media stuff. If you're interested in kind of discovering places, if you follow us at Tour Island on Instagram, we're actually on there. We're on Facebook, it's the same as well. And the Monument Monday newsletter, you're kind enough to mention, you know, I share one of my favorite places every week with a little bit of its history and stuff, and you can find out more about stuff there. So I tried to put that on a Monday just because there's no good emails on a Monday. Every time you come in, it's just a big pile of to-do lists. So it's nice just for people to have a cup of coffee and read us somewhere nice and think about that stuff.
Exactly. Something to look forward to on Mondays. Neil, thank you so much for joining me. This was just terrific.
It's great to talk to you again, Jody. Thanks so much.
Neil is always so much fun for me to talk to, and we could have gone on so much longer about the Skellig Islands and the areas surrounding those. So don't forget, you're going to find all the information you need to keep up with TUA and to get that free Ring of Kerry itinerary in the show notes. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you can't leave a review on your podcast app, you can visit Trustpilot at IrelandFamilyVacations.com/trust and just say something nice. It really would mean a lot to me. If you have questions or comments, you can email Jody, Jody, at IrelandFamilyVacations.com. As always, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, slán go.